I'm notifying you as a courtesy before I run tomorrow's story.
Cecily. Yeah, I just saw your... Oh, never mind. How you doing? What's the story?
It's about Baird Whitlock.
But there's absolutely no truth to that old story, believe me.
Old?
Old, stale,
I'm talking
rotten...
about today.
What?
Little Bird told me that he disappeared from the set today.
Oh, that. No. Yes, he did have to take a break. Minor injury, high ankle sprain.
What did you think I meant?
No, nothing. I saw your sister earlier. She was trying to resurrect some old gossip about Baird.
Oh, I'm sure she was, that cow. She wouldn't know a news story if it bit her on the posterior.
And that's a clip from Hail Caesar. Of course, Jill and Ethan Coen are the men responsible. Gentlemen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Good. You?
Yes, doing okay, thank you. And I sat in a screening room watching a movie. I was entirely on my own, and I was laughing pretty much consistently throughout. There's something, I don't know, it's something, if you're with a bunch of people, you just tend to laugh a whole lot more. But I was sitting by myself and laughing like a drain.
Good. You must have looked like an idiot.
Yeah, I absolutely did. But because the lights were down and because there was no one
No
there.
one else there.
It didn't really matter.
Who cares?
Now, the last time we spoke was for Inside Llewyn Davis. And in that interview, you were telling us all about this guy, Oscar Isaac. Who I think did you discover him? Was that his first?
Well, not really, because he wasn't busking on the street. He'd actually done a few movies, several movies. He's a trained actor.
He went to Juilliard. He then was in theater in New York, and he had done Drive. Right, he played a small part.
Oh,
in Drive.
right, yeah,
I think he
right,
played like that, the villain in Drive. He'd done a number of smaller parts in some big movies and big parts in small movies. I think a couple of in an Australian movie.
But this was a big movie for him.
It was a big movie for him. Yeah.
I think this is the movie he got noticed in a big way.
Yeah, and then he kind of disappeared, and no one's paid any attention to him since.
Right. No.
And now,
the breaks.
There he is, absolutely. Yeah. And now being in Star Wars, have you guys seen it yet? By the way,
no, we're the only two people who haven't seen Star Wars, and we know a couple of people in it. Oscar's in it, and Adam Driver, who was also in Inside Llewyn Davis.
So how come you haven't?
Just
not bothered.
Not bothered.
I'd like to
actually. I'm looking forward to it. I hear it's quite good.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just. We just don't get out much.
I'd quite like to see you guys do the next one.
We would screw it up somehow. There were the Harry Palmer movies, Michael Caine spy movies, and they gave a very valuable franchise, and they gave the last one to Ken Russell, who totally screwed it up. Why would you give that to Ken Russell? Why would you give Star Wars to us?
Anyway, you're not here to talk about Star Wars, even Llewyn Davis. Hail Caesar would be described how? If you guys just pitch it.
Pitch it?
Pitch it again. Yeah.
Well, we
you got an
we
idea.
pitched it to George Clooney actually.
Yeah, and he bought it
at one point.
A day in the
ago.
life of studio fixer Eddie Mannix, who's confronted with all of these problems on the lot in 1951. And then you say, "Kid, you've got a picture."
Kid, you got a picture. Okay, why 1951?
Well, that's a good question. It really was driven by the fact that at the center of the story, we wanted to have this movie that's being made on the lot there that Eddie Mannix is in charge of, which was a sandal movie, a movie about the life of Jesus Christ. And those movies really started making those movies in the early 50s. They went through, well, they're still making them, actually.
Yeah, they're enjoying a renaissance
They
now.
are a little bit right now, but the ones that sort of big Hollywood ones that were made by the studios in the old sort of studio system were made between like the early 50s and the early 60s when Ben-Hur was made and Spartacus and some of those other movies like that. But Quo Vadis and some of the ones that sort of followed in the 50s, 51 was kind of the start of that.
Okay, so that's why we're in 1951. Now, and our fixer, Eddie Mannix, is in charge of, he's the fixer, and there is this movie which is being made within your movie.
Yes.
Which is called Hail Caesar, A Tale of the Christ.
Yes.
Okay. So explain how that fits into this? And then George Clooney gets kidnapped by communists. I mean, this is maybe you have to see the movie.
Well,
really.
George Clooney gets kidnapped by mysterious men who, not to ruin anything.
Not to ruin anything, obviously. Spoiler. Yeah, they could be anyone.
It could be anyone. That's basically the idea that we pitched to George. Obviously, since we were
so
talking
you're
to the
pitching
actor,
it again, right?
Yeah, since we were talking to that actor, it's the story not of Eddie Mannix, who runs the studio, but of this movie star who's kidnapped off the set of this biblical epic, which is Clooney's character.
Yeah, it's the whole thing of what is it about? What's the play about? It's you see, there's this guy who's holding a spear in the background. It's always about, of course, the actor that you're talking to.
And when you were pitching it to George, did you tell him he'd spend the entire movie dressed as a
Yes,
Roman
and
soldier?
absolutely we did.
Yeah,
I think that
and
was
the leather skirt. That was a big selling point for George.
I think that actually appealed.
And
to
then
him.
we said the metal helmet with the orange bristles on the top, and he was really in.
He likes that. Okay,
yeah.
So you're going to wear the whole sort of Roman floor waxer on top of your head,
and he was
His
into
only
that.
question was, "Can I take it home with me?"
That would be very interesting. I'm sure he brings it out at parties. Should he be asked to do a turn? I just wonder if people know what a fixer is. Actually, can you explain? So Mannix clearly who was a real person. I understand.
Yeah.
He was a real person. He wasn't really anything like the character that Josh Brolin plays in our movie. We cleaned him up considerably. The real Eddie Mannix was a bit of a thug, actually. But that wasn't interesting to us. And our story, Eddie Mannix is quite a straight-ahead, decent guy.
Well-intentioned. Yeah, he's just doing his job for the studio. A fixer is somebody who, whatever problem you have, whatever its nature, he'll take care of it. If there's a scandal involving whatever, having a child out of wedlock or, drunk driving or whatever, he was the guy at the studio who made the problem go away.
And that actually is based in reality. I mean, that actually was a part of how the studios ran. And in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the beginning of the 60s, really that was disappearing because the whole nature of media had changed, but at the time they really were sort of controlling the narrative, so to speak, in terms of what got out for public consumption. And it was also, it was interesting to us too that you were, the idea of telling the story about a movie studio that's making a movie about Jesus and this other character who, it's a bit of a stretch, but in certain respects was a bit of a Christ-like figure too. Somebody who took on the burden of other people's sins and essentially made them go away. That was sort of, from a certain perspective, part of what this guy's job was.
One of the scenes I think people will come out and quote, and maybe people will reenact it on the way home, is the scene where Eddie Mannix it sounds like a stand-up setup for a joke, when he has the rabbi and he has the Catholic priest and the Orthodox priest and the Presbyterian priest.
Yes, the Protestant and the Eastern Orthodox. Yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
a rabbi, a priest, and an Eastern Orthodox
walk into a bar.
Yes.
Yeah, he convokes this assemblage of clergymen because the biblical epic Hail Caesar, which the studio is shooting, he wants to be sure that he's not going to offend everybody, so he wants to get everybody's point of view from among these clergymen about the worthiness of the ideas in the movie that they're making. So there's a heated theological discussion.
Which is absolutely fantastic, which we will not do any of the lines from, but when that scene comes, you're going to have to remember as much as you can, because it's terrific and laugh out loud funny. And it did make me think, and we do see the back of Christ's head, I think.
Very tastefully.
Very tastefully done. And of course, people forget that in the 50s that there were rules, or was it just like standard art guidelines about the way you depicted?
I think it was the latter. I don't think there were any codified rules. It was you wouldn't presume to show the face of Jesus. Yeah,
that scene in particular was sort of inspired by a particular scene in Ben-Hur. But yeah, it was all, was always a question of tastefulness was a very important sort of element.
It was a value then. Yeah, tastefulness and class. King of Kings, they did show Jesus, didn't they?
Yeah.
If I remember
They
correctly.
did in several, actually. But
So was it? I just wondered whether, because it made me think. Well, now, whenever there's any sensitivity, religious sensitivity, you would normally associate it with depictions of Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, and
Yeah.
but in the 50s, the
Well, it's a
sensitivity
Semitic
was-
thing because
yes,
Jews also
Jews
are
also are.
forbidden to depict the Godhead, as the rabbi points out in the scene you were referring to. Yes.
So anyway, the movie is terrific. I have to ask you about the Oscar season because the Oscars are virtually here, and you're nominated for Bridge of Spies along with Matt Charman. But you guys seem to be, I might have got this completely wrong, you kind of like them, but you don't, I've read comments from you said that, they're not as important as everybody seems to think they are.
Well,
it was I think it was, there's sort
we
of a
like
flap
them, but
in
we
the
don't
States
attach
about-
any importance to them.
Yeah, there's a big flap in the States about diversity in the award giving, and it just seems a little misguided to talk about it in relation to award giving as opposed to the issue is that more the movies that get made than the awards that get given. It just seemed a little front to back.
Oh, okay. So have we got the wrong end of the stick about that debate? Do you,
I would have said so.
I think to center this all on the Academy Awards is a little bit. I mean, even somebody like somebody who's very sort of has for a long time been very invested in this issue, and there's this whole thing about him not coming to the Academy Awards. Spike Lee, even Spike says essentially, really, it's not about the Academy Awards. It's about the business, and it should be about the business. It's like the Academy Awards are the Academy Awards. I mean,
and is the business changing? Do you think the business needs to change?
Well, everything's changing, so it's probably safe to say the movie business is changing. In that regard, I don't know. Is it getting better or worse?
I don't know. It's a little hard to say. Like all these businesses are essentially. The movie business is no exception. It's they're clubby. It's a club, and you try like hell to get into a lot of these clubs, and then you go, "Wow, now I'm in the club. I'm not so sure I want to be in it." But clubby businesses that have that sort of clubby aspect to them are hard to penetrate in terms of allowing a lot of different voices. That's just kind of the reality of it. It's, should they change and should they open up? Yeah, clubs shouldn't be exclusive.
But, people talk about the movie business in the States, certainly, and they think about it as mainstream Hollywood. And yes, maybe in those movies there is there are all sorts of problems. But if you think about movies as all the movies that are made everywhere, and if people were more open to going to movies that were made elsewhere, it wouldn't seem so clubby.
Yeah, one of the things is that it has to be understood that as far as Hollywood is concerned, what's important is the only thing that matters is to people who run these businesses is the bottom line. It's money. They'll make anything as long as it makes money. I mean, they don't care if you're female, black, or a Martian. If it's going to make them a lot of money, they're all for it. So there's no I don't think there's any institutional sort of prejudice or racism. I think what it is just what I said before. It's how do you get that as a club, they don't like to let new people in. They're suspicious of outsiders just as a general rule. If they knew that outsider was going to make them money, they'd be in like a shot. So that's what the problem is.
And apart from the new Star Wars film, what are you guys working on next? Can you tell us?
For the new Star Wars, we are. We're writing something. I don't know if it's something we're going to make. At the moment, it's a writing job. 60s, what would you call it? Mid-60s Southern California mystery called Black Money, although that could change, as could everything else in my description of it.
Is there a kidnapping?
No.
Promise?
Yes.
Not yet.
Joel and Ethan Coen, thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you.